When was the last time you did something hard, not because someone told you to, not because there was a reward waiting on the other side, but simply because you decided to? Because you chose to? Think about it honestly. We live in a world that has engineered discomfort out of existence. We have apps that deliver food to our door so we never have to cook. We have entertainment available 24 hours a day so we never have to sit with our own thoughts. We have the ability to numb any emotional pain within seconds, with a scroll, a click, a drink, a distraction. And slowly, quietly, without even noticing, we become soft. Not physically soft. Soft in the will. Soft in the center of who we are. We want to exercise, but we don't feel like it today. We want to build something, but we'll start next week. We want to change, but change is uncomfortable, and comfortable is right here, easy, available. We say, I can't, when we mean, I won't. We say, I'm not ready, when we mean, I'm afraid. We say, someday, when we mean, never. And the years pass. And the life we imagined, the stronger, bolder, more alive version of ourselves, remains a fantasy. A sketch that was never finished. A song that was never sung. This is the central crisis of modern human life, not lack of talent, not lack of opportunity, but lack of will. The failure to command ourselves. The failure to say, I decide. I act. I become. There is a philosopher who spent his entire life, a life of extraordinary suffering, thinking about nothing else. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. And what he discovered about the human will is still, more than 100 years later, the most powerful framework for self-mastery ever written. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was born on October 15, 1844, in Raaken, a small village in Prussia, what is now Germany. He was born into a family of Lutheran ministers. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, was a pastor, a quiet, gentle, deeply religious man who adored his young son. Friedrich was an intense child from the very beginning. Serious beyond his years. Reading before most children could speak in full sentences. Composing music before he understood what music theory was. And then, when Friedrich was just 5 years old, his father died. Karl Ludwig Nietzsche suffered a catastrophic brain illness and died in agony. Friedrich watched it happen. He was 5 years old enough to understand what was happening, young enough to be permanently shaped by it. A year later, his younger brother died too. Nietzsche grew up in a house of women, his mother, his grandmother, 2 aunts, his sister Elizabeth. He was the man of the house at 6 years old. He learned early that life does not negotiate. That suffering is not optional. That the universe does not organize itself around your comfort. He carried that lesson for the rest of his life. At school, he was exceptional. Frighteningly so. At 24 years old, before he had even completed his doctorate, he was appointed full professor of classical philology at the University of Basel in Switzerland. His reputation preceded him so completely that the university didn't wait for him to finish his degree. They simply hired him. He was 24. A full university professor. By most measurements, the story should have been getting easier. It was about to get much harder. For the rest of his productive life, from his mid-20s onward, Friedrich Nietzsche was in almost constant physical agony. Migraines so severe they left him bedridden for days, unable to open his eyes without pain. Vision problems that made reading, the very act that gave his life meaning, a physical ordeal. Vomiting fits that lasted hours. Insomnia. Stomach cramps. A body that seemed to be at war with the mind it housed. At his worst, he suffered up to 200 days of debilitating illness in a single year. 200 days. Out of 365. He resigned from his professorship in 1879 because he was too ill to continue. He lost his pension. He lived in rented rooms across Europe, in Switzerland, Italy, France, moving with the seasons, chasing climates that might ease his pain, surviving on a modest disability stipend and the generosity of a few loyal friends. He was often alone. He had no wife, no family of his own. Romantic relationships that might have brought him comfort collapsed under the weight of his peculiar intensity and his deteriorating health. His closest friendship, with the composer Richard Wagner, ended in a bitter, public rupture that wounded him deeply. He wrote most of his greatest works in this condition. Sitting at a writing desk in a rented room, half blind, head throbbing, stomach revolting, writing words that would change how humanity understood itself. Not despite the suffering. In some profound way, because of it. This is where Nietzsche's thought becomes not just interesting, but life-changing. Most people, when they think about willpower, think about forcing themselves to do things they don't want to do. Gritting your teeth. White-knuckling through discomfort. Saying no to the dessert, yes to the alarm clock. Discipline as punishment. Nietzsche saw something entirely different. He introduced the concept of the Will zur Macht, the will to power. And most people misunderstand this completely. They hear power and think domination, controlling others, accumulating wealth, winning at the expense of someone else. That is not what he meant. Nietzsche's will to power is fundamentally about self-overcoming. It is the drive to grow, to expand, to become more than you currently are. It is not power over others, it is power over yourself. It is the force that pushes the artist to paint one more hour when their hands ache. It is the force that makes the philosopher write in a darkened room with a migraine rather than surrender to emptiness. It is the force that says, I am not finished becoming. He wrote, "The secret for harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Live dangerously. Not recklessly. Not carelessly. But with the courage to risk growth. To risk failure. To risk becoming." He also gave the world one of the most powerful sentences ever written. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. This sentence, later famously cited by Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, captures something essential about human resilience. The body can endure almost anything if the mind has a reason. The will is not a muscle in the conventional sense. It is not something you exhaust. It is something you anchor, to meaning, to purpose, to the vision of who you are becoming. Nietzsche's entire life was the proof of that sentence. Between his resignation from Basel in 1879 and his mental collapse in 1889, just 10 years, Nietzsche produced an almost incomprehensible body of work. Human, all too human. The Gay Science. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Beyond Good and Evil. On the Genealogy of Morality. Twilight of the Idols. The Antichrist. Book after book, idea after idea, each one more radical, more original, more difficult than the last. He was not building on existing philosophy. He was demolishing it and constructing something entirely new in its place. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, widely considered his masterpiece, was written in a series of explosive creative bursts while he was living alone in the Swiss Alps, frequently ill, frequently in despair. He described the experience of writing it as something that happened through him more than to him, as if the ideas were simply waiting, and he was the vessel willing enough to receive them. The books sold almost nothing during his lifetime. He published some of them at his own expense. His ideas were largely ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood. He wrote letters to friends about the silence that greeted his work, not with bitterness, but with something closer to dark humor and iron resolve. He once wrote to a friend, "I am dynamite." He knew what he had created. He knew, with absolute certainty, that the world was not yet ready for it. And he wrote anyway. That is willpower in its purest form. Not the willpower to do what is easy. Not the willpower that is sustained by applause and recognition. But the willpower to keep creating in the silence. To keep becoming in the dark. To keep building something you may never see completed. Of all Nietzsche's ideas, the one I want to spend the most time on is perhaps the most radical and the most liberating. He called it amor fati. Love of fate. Not acceptance of fate. Not resignation to fate. Love of fate. The complete, wholehearted embrace of everything that has happened, everything that is happening, and everything that will happen, including the suffering, the failure, the loss, the pain. He wrote, My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it. Think about what he is saying. He is not saying pretend the pain isn't there. He is not saying perform happiness. He is saying, look directly at everything hard in your life, every rejection, every illness, every loss, every humiliation, and choose it. Choose it as part of the story. Choose it as part of what made you. Because the alternative, resisting reality, fighting what cannot be changed, spending your precious energy wishing things were different, that is the true waste. That is what actually depletes the will. Not the hard things themselves, but the war we wage against them in our minds. Nietzsche lived this. He did not rage against his migraines. He did not spend his days lamenting the loneliness, the obscurity, the physical torture of his existence. He converted all of it into fuel. He used his suffering as a laboratory. He looked at pain and asked, what is this teaching me? What is this making possible? His suffering gave him access to truths that comfort never could have reached. And here is the staggering thing, he was grateful for it. Nietzsche proposed one more idea, the most demanding thought experiment in all of philosophy. He called it the eternal recurrence. Imagine, he said, that you will live this life again, exactly as it is, infinite times. Every joy repeated. Every pain repeated. Every boring Tuesday, every heartbreak, every small embarrassment, every magnificent moment, all of it, again and again, forever. He was not making a scientific claim. He was asking a moral question. If you knew you would have to live this life again, exactly as it is, would you live it differently? Would you make different choices? Would you waste less time? Would you be braver? Would you be more awake? Most of us, if we're honest, would change a great deal. We would stop postponing the things that matter. We would stop tolerating the lives we settled for. We would stop saying, someday, and start saying, now. We would stop managing our existence, and start actually living it. That is the point. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence is not a cosmic theory. It is a mirror. It shows you, with uncomfortable clarity, whether the life you are living is a life you would choose, or a life that simply happened to you while you were waiting for something else. The person who can face that question and say, yes, I would choose this, exactly this, all of it, that person has achieved something extraordinary. That person has built a will strong enough to stand behind their own life. In January 1889, in Turin, Italy, Friedrich Nietzsche suffered a complete mental breakdown. The details are painful. He collapsed in the street, weeping, throwing his arms around a horse that was being beaten. He was 44 years old. He never recovered. He spent the last 11 years of his life in a state of mental incapacitation, first in an asylum, then under the care of his mother, then his sister. He never wrote again. He never knew what his ideas became. He died in 1900. Within decades, his work exploded across the world. Philosophers, psychologists, artists, writers, leaders, all of them grappling with what he had written in those dark, painful, magnificent years. His ideas shaped the 20th century in ways that are still unfolding. He had written, "Some are born posthumously." He was writing about himself. He knew his time had not yet come. He wrote for a future he would never see, with a will so strong it did not require the validation of the present. That is the final lesson. The will is not validated by outcomes. The will is not proven by recognition. The will is exercised in the act itself, in the choosing, the creating, the becoming, regardless of whether the world is watching, regardless of whether the world is ready. You are not Nietzsche. You do not need to be. But you carry something he spent his life trying to describe. Something inside you that is more than habit, more than instinct, more than comfort-seeking. You have a will. And the question, the only question that really matters, is what you are doing with it. First, stop confusing willpower with force. Nietzsche's insight was that true will is not about gritting your teeth. It is about meaning. Find the deep reason behind what you want to build, not the surface goal, but the soul of it, and the will to pursue it becomes almost automatic. Ask yourself, why does this matter? Get the answer to that, and the how becomes bearable. Second, embrace difficulty as a teacher, not an enemy. Your struggles are not obstacles to your growth. They are your growth. Every uncomfortable conversation, every failed attempt, every painful season, it is all curriculum. Nietzsche did not become one of the greatest thinkers in history despite his suffering. The suffering was the laboratory. Stop trying to eliminate difficulty from your life. Start asking what it is making possible. Third, practice a more fatty, even in small things. Start today. The next time something goes wrong, a plan collapses, a relationship disappoints, a project fails, instead of fighting it, ask, what if I chose this? What if this is exactly what needed to happen? It does not mean being passive. It means not wasting your energy on resistance that changes nothing. Accept it. Then act. Fourth, test yourself with the eternal recurrence. At the end of each week, ask honestly, if I had to live these 7 days again, exactly as they were, would I be at peace with that? If the answer is no, you have your instructions. Not guilt. Not shame. Just clarity. Adjust. Choose differently. Build the week you would be proud to live forever. Fifth, create for the future, not for the applause. Nietzsche wrote for an audience that did not yet exist. He built his life's work in obscurity, in pain, in silence, with absolute faith in the value of what he was doing. Whatever you are building, build it for that standard. Not for the likes, not for the approval, not for the recognition that may or may not come. Build it because it is worth building. Because you decided it was worth building. And that decision, that act of will, is its own reward. Here is what I want you to take away from this. Willpower is not something you either have or don't have. It is not a gift distributed to the lucky few. It is a practice. It is a philosophy. It is a daily act of choosing yourself, your deepest self, the self that wants to grow, over the part of you that wants to stay comfortable. Friedrich Nietzsche chose, every single day, to show up to the page. With a body that was failing him. With a world that was ignoring him. With a future he could not see. He chose to create, to think, to become, because the alternative was not living. It was merely existing. And you, right now, in whatever circumstances you are carrying, you have that same choice. You can wait for conditions to improve. You can wait until you feel ready, until the timing is right, until someone gives you permission. You can manage your life at a safe, comfortable distance from its full potential. Or you can decide. You can say, this is the life I have. This is the body I have. This is the time I have. And I am going to will myself, fully, deliberately, courageously, into becoming the person I am capable of being. Not someday. Now. Because the will does not grow in comfort. It grows in the moment you choose the hard thing. It grows in the moment you face what frightens you. It grows in the moment you decide, against all the voices that say stop, rest, settle, that you are not finished yet. Nietzsche wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." You know those words. Almost everyone does. But here is what most people miss. He wasn't talking about surviving. He was talking about transforming. He was saying that the hardest experiences, if you face them with your will intact, do not just leave you standing, they leave you changed. Elevated. More. That is your invitation. Everything you have been through, every hard year, every painful loss, every moment you thought you couldn't continue but did, it has been making you stronger. It has been building something in you that easy circumstances never could. Now use it. Stand up in your own life. Make the decision you've been postponing. Start the work you've been afraid to start. Become the version of yourself that you already know is waiting, not for luck, not for permission, not for a perfect moment, but for your will to meet it. That moment is now. Amor fati. Love your fate. Choose it. Build it. Become it. Go.